Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name. And a lot of questions that I receive when I post, our deck guides and our tip videos is, hey Rob, I don't have this card in the deck. What should I replace it for? Or hey Rob, I just got Rag or Sylvanas. Where can I make room for this in your budget deck or whatever the deck you happen to be playing that you're trying to fit the new legendary or new epic you happen to get into that deck? And as I can't answer all of these questions with the exact same answer because everybody's, situation that they're in is different and the cards and the decks that they're playing are different, I can give you the general concept and ideas of what you should be looking for when you're trying to upgrade your deck or you're downgrading one of our deck guides, So we make a deck, or I make a deck guide. You don't have all the cards, but you have some of the cards, but you want to know, what exactly should you replace with the cards that you don't have, but you want similar outcomes. So in this video, we're going to look at my Tempo Mage deck, and we're going to take out some of the more expensive cards and kind of put in what cards do relatively the same thing, but just may not be as powerful, but are definitely easier to get for some of you newer or beginner players that can't afford, all of these high class, legendary or epic minions right off the bat, which is totally understandable. So let's head on over to our Hearthstone, our actual Hearthstone screen. Come on, XSplit, work with me. There we go. So we'll go to our Tempo Mage list. This is our Tempo Mage deck, which we just did our guide on recently. And a lot of questions most likely will come of this deck of which cards to replace for which, because this is one of those decks that every card really is important. Some decks, like Reno decks, some of the cards in the deck don't necessarily matter that much. They can be easily teched in and out due to the fact that Kazakus and Reno are really the only good cards in the deck. But for Tempo Mage, it's a little bit different. So we'll start out with the heavy stuff. Rob, I can't put in Ragnaros. I don't have this legendary yet. No problem. Buy Ragnaros. So we think Ragnaros, 8 mana cost. It's pretty heavy, right? Let's actually think on the bounds of I don't even have any adventure modes yet. So you don't have like Medivh, for example, which would be another good card to put in here and replace it for Ragnaros. You don't even have any adventure modes. Fuck adventure modes. They cost too much. Rob, I'm a free to play. What do you got for me? So let's go through the mage kit, right? We're looking, we need the minions to be pretty heavy. 5-drop minions, not going to do it. Ragnaros was an 8-drop. We need to replace it with something spicy. Unfortunately, again, Ronin's a legendary. Ink Master just doesn't fit. That's a Reno card. Archmage would be another good pick, but Rob, this is a legendary. Fuck legendaries. We aren't about it. Faceless Summoner, how you doing? So this is a common card. It's a 6-drop, so it's not exactly that 8 mana slot, but it's still a good card because not only are you going to be able to play this minion, it's going to summon another 3-crossed minion. And assuming that if you're running this on a budget version, Flamewaker is a card that you might not have because this is from Blackrock Mountain. And we're going to have to take that out, but we haven't had any direct replacements yet. But Faceless Summoner can actually summon you a Flamewaker, which you don't have because of this battle cry, and it costs a relatively decent sized large minion. So we actually just throw in 2 Faceless Summoners because it doesn't do exactly what Rag does, but it fills your big minion slot, and it can summon something that you don't have in the deck, but you need. And it's a common. You're not going to get exactly what Ragnaros does because Ragnaros is a legendary and you just replaced it with a common. There's not going to be any direct relationships, or why would you ever have the legendary in your deck? But we can do what we can with what we've got. And that's replacing a Ragnaros with 2 commons. And it doesn't fit the same slot of dealing 8 to the face, but it's close to it by being able to summon a decent sized minion. Like I said, replace minions in your deck with things that you may not have. Conjurer, don't need to replace that. It's a common for the most part. I think it comes from, it's not an adventure mode card. Azure Drake, it's a rare, not that hard to find, found in a ton of decks. Water Elemental is a Mage Basic, Forgotten Torch, adventure mode card. Goodbye, buddy. So you're like, Rob, I just removed Forgotten Torch. It feels horrible. What do I do? So as we know, Forgotten Torch is a 3 mana spell that does damage to face. So, all right, let's go to Mage. Let's go to 3 mana. Secrets normally cost 3 mana, and they're normally rares. These are epics, probably won't replace those. This is a common, not too bad. We'll take a look. Spell Slinger could potentially give you a spell that you don't have. It's a 3 mana. It's a minion, not a spell, so we'll have to keep that in mind. And then Volcanic Potion, which is a rare that AoEs the board. This is going to hurt you more than help you in the Tempo Mage. Looking at the decks, we only have 4 4-drops. We could probably fit in another 4-drop, right? Close enough. It's a spell. Okay. And I'm thinking, I think I got a Polymorph. Polymorph is a great card. It can deal with large-scale minions. It can even deal with smaller minions. Because we have a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of 3-drops, but because our 3-drop spot is like 3 and 4 drops relatively fit in the same category. This is going into like arena stuff. But I would have to say turn 4, what you can do is more impactful than what you can do on turn 3, because 4 is kind of deciding who is going to be running the middle of the game, right? Who's going to be summoning the Azure Drake first, who's going to be summoning the Tomb Villager first, who's going to be doing whatever in the middle of the game, and that's kind of who's going to sway the battle in the late game is whoever takes control during the middle game. Granted that the early game was kind of even. So with that, we're replacing a Forgotten Torch with another, relatively good card. It costs 1 more, so it's going to scale your curve a little bit upwards, but it still has a very, powerful outcome. They play a Rag or a Sylvanas, and you can polymorph it. So I really don't mind replacing a Forgotten Torch, which was a 1-of, with a polymorph, which is a 1-of. You find yourself in an oh shit scenario, you found your oh shit button. Looking down, 1 Alkalite. It's a common, not that hard to get. Looking down. Ooh, Blood Mage. Shit, this is a legendary. I don't have that card yet. Well, okay. It's a 2 mana, and it spell damage +1, and it draws a card. So, if we look at the 2 mana minions for Mage. Arcane Explosion. This does 1 damage to everything. Not exactly the same effect. This is a 2/3, not exactly the same effect. Nothing close. All right, let's go to neutrals. What neutral card could have something similar to this? Blood Mage, yes. That would have to be similar, but we can't pick that card. Going through the list here, we actually could type in draw. Blood Mage is there, Loot Hoarder's there. So Loot Hoarder is an option. It's a 2 mana, 2/1 Death Rattle draw card. So it's half a Blood Mage and it has an additional attack. Not too bad. We can go to Spell. This is kind of the process I go through if I don't have a card or you're wanting to make a budget deck. This is exactly what I do. Geomancer, 2 mana, 2/2, spell damage +1. So Geomancer is 1/2 of Blood Mage, while Loot Hoarder is the other half of Blood Mage. So if you find yourself that you play this deck and you constantly run out of cards, Loot Hoarder is probably a better card for you to grab. Or maybe because we replaced a 3 mana Roaring Torch and we have room to play another Alkalite, we could actually throw in an additional Alkalite to replace the Roaring Torch, and then instead of playing the Blood Mage, we would play the Polymorph. Seems pretty good. We keep the draw. We replace a 3-drop minion with a 3-drop spell with a 3-drop minion. So, or we could go with the Geomancer if we're looking to get the extra spell damage because we have the Arcane Blast. But for example, let's say you don't have the Arcane Blast either. So removing the Arcane Blast makes it so getting the additional spell damage in your deck still is important because of the Fireballs, Frostbolts, and things like that in the Firelance portal. But your early game is severely damaged because you can't Arcane Blast Blood Mage something for 3 mana like a Totem Golem. So in this situation, I feel like drawing more cards than not would be pretty important. So we'd most likely put in another Alkalite of Pain. So let's get 2 Pains in here to replace the Blood Mage draw. And then we need 2 early game spells to make up for the Arcane Blast and or some form of AoE. So I kind of like throwing in the... We could throw in 1 Geomancer, right? And then if we look here, we actually could throw in Babbling Books, but again, adventure mode card. We're going to forget Babbling Book exists. We could go, you find yourself playing with a lot of warriors. We go with Mirror Image. We could go with the double Arcane Explosion if you're playing a lot of, again, smaller Pirate Warrior based decks. I've seen in a few tech-ins with the double Arcane, sometimes 1 Arcane, sometimes none Arcane. Fuck Arcane, right? Let's play something else, Rob. I don't want to play Arcane Missiles. No problem. So Geomancer, we could leave it here and play double Loot Hoarder. But since, again, we're not going to be playing the Arcane Blast and or Explosion, we'll actually take it out. And let's look at more 1 mana stuff. Ooh, we could even go ahead and tech in an Acidic Swamp Ooze, which would be good too. So that's always an option. Budget Blaze play, like, when you're playing a budget deck, you may not have the most powerful cards, but you can tech in stuff like Ooze that makes it so even if your opponent is playing some of the most, aggressive and powerful cards, like Shaman, they play, Spirit Claws or Jade Claws, you just throw down Acidic Swamp Ooze and everything's going to be all right. So that's a good card to tech in. We can look further. None of these 1s drops really feel like they amaze me, to be honest. You could throw in a Mistress of Mixtures, which is a common, and it'll actually heal you, plus it's a 1-drop 2/2. It also heals your opponent, but a lot of the times in the game, the early game is you developing the board and kind of going even, where the mid game is where you take off, where you can actually Sorcerer's Apprentice, like double spell, gain the board, and then go in from whatnot. But yeah, it looks like the Ooze was probably our best bet in the early game to kind of tech in there if you didn't like the Mirror Image or the Explosion. So yeah, so we've made our very expensive Tempo Mage deck with 2 legendaries and a bunch of adventure cards into a pretty budget-based mage card with still very powerful stuff in it. We still, in replace of maybe being able to do more burst, we've added a little bit more control with the polymorph, the weapon destroyer generations, and a little bit more minion presence on the board with cards like the Faceless Summoner. But we've kept the foundation of course, the fireballs, the frostbolts, and all of the spell power cards that allow our spells to be even more powerful than they currently are, with the ability to make them do more damage. So, with that, I know this was very fast, and I went over it kind of quick, and there's a lot of detail and a lot of conversation in a very small amount of time, but that's basically how you have to look at making a deck that maybe you can't afford right away, and making it so you can afford it. You have to make the changes necessary, you have to see what fits, and what you want the deck to do. And this is basically what you're going to do for all of your decks. So with that said, hopefully this kind of hit that question of how to upgrade and downgrade a deck. This is the same thing for upgrading as you did. I actually was going to do, since we downgraded a deck, I was going to do an upgrade version of the deck, which was basically the same thing I did, but just in reverse. So while I was doing that, I was like, shit, I'm just going to tell them the same thing I just told them, but backwards. So it's like, okay, I have a Ragnaros, so where do I put Rag? You take out the Faceless Summoner and you put in Rag, which is exactly what we took out. When we took out Rad, we just added a Faceless Summoner. So it's kind of like the same process, but in reverse, so I wasn't going to do that to you guys. So hopefully you've enjoyed, and hopefully some of you got some value out of this video. I know a lot of you are like, Rob, well, duh. But a lot of you newer players, you're like, shit, well, you know, that's a good way to look at how to upgrade and downgrade a deck. So with that said, hopefully you've enjoyed, and if any of you would like to add on to the description, if I missed anything, feel free to, and I'm sure a lot of players will look in the comment section for further help. So as always, I'm Warshack, and happy whatever the hell day it is.